More and more college instructors and students are engaging into college discourse as they learn about the sobering lessons from Bach on evident, significant discrepancies in many didactic aids for teaching Bach's music with the actual score facts, like cluster chords, that were defiantly employed by him despite the ban and left unresolved to embolden them further. And yet, they were commonly missed by many musicians. These insights on essential for all musicians' perception flaws that call for the obvious and urgent didactic update had been provided in the highly anticipated new ebook, Paradox of Invisible Dissonance in Fugue Parody by J.S. Bach, graciously shared by the author Rosalina Gutmann, demonstrating her striking intellectual leadership. The false standard for emotional repression in Bach's music led to the staggering phenomenon of the collective blind spot among many musicians. And as the result, the unique design of Bach allowed for the deeper understanding of the root psychological drivers for the inner mechanisms of inner psyche previously missed in earlier research and now enabled thanks to the music embodiment. It allowed for the sensory augmented data on sociosomatics, representing the textbook classic concepts known as social influences, with no oversimplification, since at the time when they were formulated, such terms as somatics were not in common use. And as the result, collective blind spot over emboldened by Bach dissonance presented rare glimpse into unconscious mind for observing staggering perceptual phenomenon, the maladaptive, conformity-driven transmutation of moral atrocity culture of politically correct distortions. Tradition had the power to influence and to morph musicians' perception of his music to such a degree that would make it impossible for them to read notation, preventing them from differing from self-defeating convention, despite the obvious and undeniable absurdity and hazard of abiding by the dogma of emotional repression. The ebook guides readers through examination of the evidence of the perceptual paradox, capable of afflicting many musicians, indiscriminately of academic titles, honorary rewards, fame, acclaim. Upon recognition of the error, the instructors are professionally obligated to shift to the correct interpretation from the false misrepresentations based on this blind spot, leading to other related significant aspects of Bach's legacy. And fortunately, once the readers grasp the obvious and self-explanatory nature of musical humor, spelled out by Bach with great mastery, that was clarified by the author, the natural response to Bach's surprising jokes with laughter is certain to break through paralysis of somatic inertia. It instantly helps to crush the barriers of moral dilemma caused by the resentment to change, allowing for clarity of the sober look at the missed by everyone's score facts. And this intuitive use of humor by Bach for didactic purposes is evident of his neuroscientist's mindset. Thanks to provided scaffolding, laughter is all what is necessary for the recovery from this blind spot. After grasping Bach's strategy of dissonance formation and the key role of dynamic emphasis in bringing out notated by him clashing effect, readers' understanding of Bach's call for engagement with his satirical humor will need nothing else for clarification of the means for achieving intended by Bach's sonic effect. Bach's own notation is self-explanatory and leaves no room for any excusology to insist on confining Bach with emotional repression. In fact, this achievement of boisterous sound effect is the key didactic task of this Bach's lesson. And it is obvious with no need for any archival records, contrary to the common practice in Bach scholarship, to hold Bach required to present documentation for his riveting innovations to Bach scholars, who either unable to grasp them in his notation or refuse to acknowledge them. Indeed, the unearthed meaning of this tiny didactic jewel by Bach leads readers to further revelations, including the urgent change in teaching approaches to the entire Bach's legacy. However, as any change, this challenge from Bach to the musicians of his time and ours demands to stand up to excusology, to retaliation, to change related to the necessary adherence to the truth. That is what turns this fugue into the test for professional ethics and intellectual leadership that has the evident capacity to shape collective consciousness. Liberation from this collective perceptual blind spot of the invested by composer of humorous meaning from unfortunate oversimplification of musical expression is truly rewarding, with fun and joy of opportunities for engaging music imagination with Unearthed from Oblivion spelled out with notation metaphors of musical humor in this laughter manifesto by Bach. They provoke instant resonance to authentic expression of the composer, as well as also lead to authentic comedic interpretative associations of performers and audiences. And this fun introduction to self reflection through music is the superb strategy for developing such skill even during young age. This ebook helps to understand what prevented many musicians from grasping such fun and effective lesson of Bach for a long time. The author pointed attention to the tradition of political correctness and manipulative biographical distortions of Bach's legacy for being the source of confusion for many musicians. Without dismantling, it was allowed to manifest into the false requirement for hazardous emotional repression. The involved practice of double standard of such unnatural for any music approach had been planting lifelong cognitive dissonance among millions of young music students of Bach's music, leading to psychological barriers to greatness. That is why the author included citations to studies on hazards of emotional repression that may not linger, continue to escape the vigilance of the advocates for musicians' wellness in the field of music education, leading to the increasing hazardous impacts on millions of musicians of all ages and levels. That is why one of the key aims of this publication has been to awaken readers to the Bach's own goal of promoting the achievement of emotional liberation of his own students is critical for millions of affected musicians. On the other hand, these shared insights by the author also illuminated missing awareness of the impacts of the transmutation of the culture of moral atrocity around Bach into evident collective sociosomatic trend of maladaptive conformity of collective blind spot. Bach's unique design of this fugue allowed to observe at the new, deeper level the evidence of the social pressure to disable clarity of perception, examined in the past textbook classic studies for Ash, Milgram, Lucifer effects. The requirement for emotional withholding paralyzed many musicians' capacity to read notation, blocking the ability to see and to hear, intentionally employed dissonance by Bach, with his wisdom of the insightful master teacher, with neuroscientists' mindset. This great power of maladaptive conformity has the origins in herd instinct that promoted tribalism impulses to match false, yet commonly distorted conventional expectations for oversimplification of the complex beauty of Bach's dynamically nuanced polyphony. Besides this subject of significant discrepancy, readers are in for a number of other related surprises. For example, this fugue in the style of parody on dogma has direct link to Bach's false retaliatory imprisonment. However, majority of musicians and their fans have never heard of such dramatic events in his biography, or at best, have very limited and often distorted grasp about his lifelong struggles with imposed upon him limitations of prisoner of conscience, due to his open expression of moral indignation regarding the injustice towards professional guild of musicians. Music innovator Bach became the victim of skillfully calculated unfair stigma of convict in retaliation to his riveting innovations beyond the senseless dogma of composition rules that threatened with changes the existing cruel social norms of the Castletown society of his time. No, Bach committed no crime by giving his notice of leave, trying to move from unbearable for creative expression atmosphere to another employer. Senseless retaliatory misuse of authority for creating lifelong witch hunt by character assassination was due to his refusal to be censored by mediocrity. Ebook points to the most unfair vulnerability of genius musician, as well as the profession of musician, to such sophisticated predatory minds, also spotlighting systemic mockery on justice, that Bach couldn't afford to object in court by hiring legal defense from false accusations and dire human rights violations. But while suffering from unfair public humiliation during his month-long imprisonment, based on false accusations, and despite committing no crime, genius musician wasted no time. He defied his harassers by turning this limitation of his access to any instruments by the unfair confinement into the opportunity to set the record in the field. And his achievement still remains unsurpassed. Bach conceived his monumental cycle of 24 preludes and fugues of well-tempered clavier during this month-long false imprisonment, creating one of his most popular masterpieces that continues to serve as the Old Testament for musicians' development. Indeed, This legendary Bach's record of all time in creating very complex polyphonic masterpiece had been featured in the encyclopedic publication for musical achievements of the time. That was the equivalent of to today's Guinness Book of Records in the field of music, published with many translations by his student's son. And some simpler preludes had practical application right away as the didactic assignments for his older son, according to his famous notebook. Indeed, these deleted from biography of Bach facts allow performers to grasp biographical roots for the appearance of the grotesque, satirical meaning of fugue parody that he included into this didactic cycle for advanced pianists. That was a part of his record-setting effort. And the readers will have the chance to examine Bach's intricate polyphonic technique for creating the sense of musical humor and the central role of dynamic accents that is essential for projecting defiant dissonance that was enabled by the emerging hammer clavier action. All parts of Bach's life were limited by the shocking state of impoverishment caused by the systemic devaluation and marginalization of musicians, and the failure of honest portrayal of the bitter truth that paradoxically still remains emblematic today for millions of Bach's colleagues is the evident betrayal of Bach's enormous sacrifice for his lifelong battle with incivilities of surrounding him mediocrity, unable to recognize prolific genius of all time. Such immoral tradition of persecution by impoverishment of musicians in the role of consciousness transformers that had not changed till now, despite the affluence of today's society, should have been boldly exposed in Bach's scholarship by following the inspiring example of advocate for humanity Bach. His exemplary strive should have been held in high esteem for inspiration of the movement by the students of his scores. These and other related subjects, illuminated by Bach's Unearthed from Distortion's tiny didactic fugue parody, have obvious resonance to millions of musicians who still struggle with centuries-long tradition of senseless yet institutionalized cruelty of persecution of the music makers, whose impact of elevation of consciousness isn't tangible and yet is the most invaluable for the human brain evolution. Instead, paradoxically, Bach's music was confined by the very dogma that he opposed with relentless passion. Pianists and other musicians had been required to follow his time's imitations by the senseless requirement for using no or limited range of nuanced dynamics in order to replicate inferior design of the keyboards incapable of dynamic richness of emerging during Bach's time hammer clavier. Bach scholars failed to notice how such insistence on deforming transformative essence of Bach's music had been in conflict with his innovations in compositional style of far more complex polyphonic texture that was not possible to execute without alterations, without the capacities of hammer clavier. As the result of this tradition of biographical distortions, many generations of pianists and other musicians were very negatively affected by the imposed during childhood emotional repression requirement, under the false premise of replicating inferior design of harpsichord and clavichord, in disregard of the proof in Bach's scores of his bold defiance of such approach. And the result of such indoctrination of many musicians into emotional repression since childhood had manifested into the staggering collective blind spot that the readers of this ebook are guided to observe. The practice of emotional repression caused cognitive paralysis, disabling capacity of elemental score reading that is needed to notice cluster chords and other dissonant sonorities, along with their unmistakable metaphorical function of creating the sense of disruption and violation of listeners' expectations, leading to comic relief reaction. For generations, such enjoyment and fun intended by composer was off limits for musicians, due to their faithful practice of this hazardous and false educational standard. However, it was possible only due to the manipulation of public opinion by the blunt distortions of Bach's biographical facts, including under-publicizing and withholding from the public of the records related to his hands-on involvements with emerging hammer clavier and personal collaboration with instrument maker Silberman on its technical improvements. That is why this ebook features still unknown to majority Bach's sales receipt about his selling one of such fortepiano instruments and actively helping to promote it. Imposition of so-called historically informed standard on Bach music was based on false tradition that protectionism for the keyboards with inferior design that Bach tried hard to overcome with various personal efforts. And the fugue parody is the evident example of such strive that Bach notated with dogma defiant dissonance. However, under no circumstances forcing music instructors to plant emotional repression in the minds of children who learn Bach at the time of their formative for the brain development is unconscionable. The resulting limiting mental block had been interfering with music educators' unique capacity to foster emotional resonance in Bach's music. But that is essential for nurturing the skills for harnessing music instinct, based on joy neurochemicals with powerful transformative impact of brain function. Emotional repression in music disrupts interhemispheric balance of the brain, the balanced heart-brain communications, the conscious and unconscious synergy, interfering with its core function to do just the contrary, to restore it. Thus, the lack of proactive effort to change such injustice imposed on music educators in the role of consciousness transformers reveals intellectual disability for leadership positions. And such limitations for the key professional capacity of musicians is intolerable for humanity at all times, and even more unaffordable now in the face of global threats that demand for musicians to lead humanity through the existentially important shift to higher level of consciousness through the development of better functioning brain. The author also points to the perpetuity of suffering of many generations of musicians from the staggering self-betrayal among representing the field academic elite. The observed bitter truth about monumental failure of grasping Bach's core essence had become evident through reflection in his music, and readers who witness the issue are often moved to creation of discussions and discourse in the urgent changes. The dominance of such mentality among the leadership of music education field disabled the capacity to make tangible impact by addressing the evident shocking disconnect among majority of the society with heart-based, compassionate perception of the fate of millions of forced into unbearable struggles musicians, reflected by observation of related to Bach trends, politically correct and lacking compassion distortion of the subjects, related to Bach's suffering from lifelong persecution for his musical innovations, makes sense, especially today, in democratically oriented society, when more and more people are becoming desperate to use their awareness of the vibrational essence of our universe for elevating consciousness. And the example of Bach's battle with zombification in music and beyond brings important historical perspective to the current state of consciousness of normalized disconnect and detachment from emotional reality among majority of people. Zombification of music contributes to its devaluation and diminishes the efforts of advocacy. And the essential capacity of music to reflect and to refine nuanced self-perception of emotional subtleties is the critically important path to self-reflection and self-mastery that plays the key role in maintaining fragile balance both within the micro-universe of the human brain and the surrounding us vastness of outer universe. And since Bach's time, the lack of relevant valuation of the dire universal need for development of the skills to use transformative power of music to bridge this link is yet to emerge into urgent action of leaders in music education who are responsible to raise awareness among the society about the current disconnect of all parts of our society with vibrational essence of our universe, along with resulting consequences of global consciousness of self-defeat and self-destruction through anthropogenic global threats. Indeed, this interdisciplinary perspective is critical for breaking the senseless tradition of persecution of musicians in the role of consciousness transformers by devaluation and underpayment, with the impacts on global consciousness of self-demise that had come with unbearable price for humanity. The lack of access to developing the skills for harnessing music instinct among majority of population led to significant underdevelopment of integrative holistic brain function, promoting widespread self-defeat consciousness, manifesting over generations into fast approaching anthropogenic global threats. The new ebook by Rosalina Gutman contains the addendums that are dedicated to the Bach-reflected collective trend of self-defeat with the unique glance on illuminated through his music and otherwise invisible psychological drivers of maladaptive patterns of moral atrocity culture caused by the lacking sense of interconnectedness of all matter in our universe. Due to remaining intellectual leadership of Bach, the author Rosalina Gutmann calls upon students of Bach's scores to recognize his impact of the brain advancement and Rob demonstrate intellectual leadership relevant to being the intellectual vanguard of the society. She calls upon those fortunate to have music literacy and to be able to benefit from Bach's lessons to help translating the shared knowledge in her book Lessons of Bach on the Power of Music that is yet to become known to majority. This unique publication points existential role of transformative power of music on the self-propelled evolution of the brain in the face of making the urgent global shift of consciousness from environmental insanity that had become ever more evident from book Countdown by Dr. Swan, cited by the author in the addendum on multidisciplinary implications of the Bach-related discoveries and their hands-on applications. The shocking data from 60 plus male fertility studies forecasting fast approaching onset of human extinction from cumulative effect of toxicity caused by the rapid rise of environmental illnesses and the lack of pandemic declaration and related priorities is evident of the very serious widespread blind spot on the rapidly approaching global threat caused by the serious developmental problem among population. The lack of the integrative brain balanced cognition resulting from no priority for using music for balancing curriculum, and the evident Bach's lessons for musicians on preventing zombification in music and beyond play the key part in elevating quality of music education and making it effective. The ebook calls musicians and music educators to declare camaraderie and join Bach's unfinished battle with the forces that had been preventing humanity from access to self-propelled evolution and self-mastery beyond evolutionary relics of the human mind through music education known to elevate consciousness and to advance brain function through the power of joy neurotransmitters. Learn more details from ebook, now offered at the 25% off time-limited discount during book launch, celebration of camaraderie with Bach's-led strive for centuries overdue justice for persecuted by poverty musicians throughout the world. Go to YouTube channel description to copy and paste promo code 25% off share camaraderie and then apply this e-coupon at the website for ebook www.paradoxofinvisibledissonance.com. All musicians deserve to experience intellectual leadership of genius. Master music instructor Bach, his guidance towards development of their higher human potential. Share this link as well as your feedback and testimonials to demonstrate camaraderie of music educators committed to serving communities in the role of consciousness transformers, despite all odds, in the face of having to struggle with unstoppable tradition of persecution of musicians.